Well everyone, 2025 is already in the rearview mirror as 2026 charges full steam ahead, but before I worry about what is coming this year, right now I want to take a look back at every game I not only reviewed, but played in 2025, to see if I was right or wrong about what I thought about them. Was I too nice? Maybe I could have been harsher, or maybe my review for a game was just straight up bad. Though my biggest goal through this video is to hopefully help all of you find a new game that maybe you have never heard of, while recapping what was one of the more interesting years of gaming for me personally, along with sharing what stands at the top of my mountain as my game of the year. Which there's no better place to start going through this giant list than with a pair of games that I did not expect to be as good as what they were, Magnolia and Lilies. So at the start of 2025, I was browsing around upcoming games and one caught my eye, Magnolia. While it's hard for me to get into Metroidvania style games since they rarely innovate on the formula, something about Magnolia just made me want to check it out, and I'm so glad I did. While the art style was cool and the music featured one of my favorite artists, Millie, the actual gameplay was really compelling to me as I made my way through this atmospheric world. The reason for this is because of the pace at which you get new abilities for combat and exploration, along with how the game is designed around you getting these so fast. I say this because the level design never outgrows any of your abilities. They all stay relevant through the entire game, which made it never feel like it ever got repetitive since you never really ever relied on a single ability for long. But with that said, if there's one issue I had with the game that I wish I would have mentioned in my video on it, is it felt a little too easy to find secrets thanks to how the map system is set up. But outside of that, it really was an amazing experience, which because of that experience, some of you who watched that video told me to play Lilies, and so I did, which I never expected to actually like it more than Magnolia, but I did, and the reason for this is very simple despite Magnolia being better on paper in almost every way, which that reason is because Lilies was such a darker game. The world, bosses, and even how Lily changes over time as you progress through the game made it feel so much more compelling to me. It made me feel very invested into the main character and what might happen to her. Not to mention, because of how the mechanics of the game are set up, the game had a bit more challenge to it compared to Magnolia, and I really enjoyed that, like abilities being limited in use or how making contact with enemies would damage you in Lilies unlike Magnolia. But make no mistake, both these games are absolutely amazing and I strongly recommend both of them. Something I wish I could say about Lost Soul Aside, and I really mean that, because Lost Soul Aside is the perfect example of what happens when a game tries to be more than it is. At the surface, when just looking at the game, it looks like it has everything you would want from an action game, a flashy but fun combat system, some light exploration with challenges to find, and epic boss fights to really end a level on a high note. But everything deep within each one of those are so strangely designed that the game becomes almost this never-ending chore to play. Like the way elements work with weapons felt very conflicting, where you're basically punished for using something like fire and ice at the same time. Then other issues is the game levels can drag on for way too long, making it feel very repetitive, and I can go on and on. But there's no need to. Lost Soul Aside has a lot of issues, and while it has gotten countless updates that have improved the game greatly compared to when I played it, it's just one of those games I just can't really recommend outside of it being on sale for cheap, because while there's plenty of content in the game that can be fun, I believe most will find all the content between those fun and engaging sections not very compelling. Unlike Skate's Story, a game that is nothing but compelling every step of the way, because every moment in this game feels like a fever dream. The art style is wild and abstract, the gameplay is funky and probably captures what it truly means to skateboard more than any other game. I mean, I haven't skated in years, and the game somehow made it feel like I was back out there skating again. With that said, one of the best parts about the game is how the music kind of brings all of this together in its boss fights, where you are able to immerse yourself into a one-of-a-kind experience that shouldn't work, but it does. Though as I mentioned in my review for it, I didn't like my first experience with the game. Only after coming back to it did I end up really enjoying the game, and while I know it won't be for everyone thanks to the controls being a little strange and art style making it hard to see at times, I strongly recommend giving Skate Story at least a try anyways, because you might end up surprised just like I was. Though if there's one thing I can say for sure, what didn't surprise me was how good Expedition 33 was. At least for me, from when I first saw it, I already knew I was going to love the game. It's no secret to anyone who has watched this channel for years that I love turn-based RPGs. I mean, Super Mario RPG is my favorite game of all time, is where the name of my channel comes from. Plus, anytime a game has a reactive combat system like it does, just say no more to me, I'm sold. Though Expedition 33 is so much more than its combat, the art direction is absolutely incredible, especially in the enemy design, something I don't think people appreciate enough. The reason the combat works so well has nothing to do with the reactive system it has. It all has to do with how enemies fight based on their designs and the variety there is across the game. That is what allows its combat to shine, which was so important to nail, because if that didn't work, I think the game could have easily fell over itself, since there does come a point where while you do have an insane variety of builds, if you can dodge and parry everything, nothing else really matters. So making enemy designs compelling and interesting was a must for the combat to succeed, because one of the few things I feel Expedition 33 lacked in was encounter variety. There needed to be more forced scenarios that made you have to think and use all the mechanics of the game, which is something we likely got in the endgame content. Though outside of that, my only other issue was Act 3 really felt like a mess in how it was set up. But it's not the end of the world when not only the combat feels this good, but the music, story, and characters are literally some of the best I've seen in an RPG. Plus, with some new free content getting added to the game just last month, there's no better time to jump into it now if you haven't. With that said, as much as I love RPGs, and I'm sure some of you could relate to this, but I like to take a break from them at times due to how much of a commitment they can be, and no game was better for that than Rift of the NecroDancer. This game is like a weird mashup of Guitar Hero, Mania, and Punch-Out, which sees you battle against monsters as they come down the board, each having different movements and mechanics you have to be aware of, with a variety of difficulties to test your skills in. Which this gameplay is paired nicely with a story full of mini-games and sick boss fights that I really wish there was more of. Though that's okay, because Rift of the NecroDancer is a game that is super easy to pick up and play that has no real-time commitment. Plus, it continues to get new content through both official DLC and community-made maps, so you will always have something to do in it. Something I'm glad I can also say about Age of Imprisonment. This was my first Hyrule Warriors game, and I had zero expectations going into it. In fact, from the trailers I watched, I thought it looked terrible if I'm being honest, but after putting in well over 70 hours into the game at this point, it was one of my favorite gaming experiences of the year. What I mean when I say that is from a purely gameplay point of view, I simply had a blast turning my brain off and just shredding through hordes of enemies, both on the ground and in the sky with its Star Fox-like levels. And this is despite the few issues I had with some of the mechanics of the game, like how so many different characters didn't feel unique to play as. Though I want to make it clear, there was never a point I wasn't having fun playing this game, and the final boss, absolute cinema. Which is something I cannot say about Herdling, a game I've really wanted to like, because I thought the idea behind its gameplay was interesting. You are a herder, and you have to herd these animals called calicorns. Simple enough, but if done right, could be very compelling. Unfortunately, it wasn't. The game ended up being very repetitive and way too easy, which I get it. The game is more about the journey, but that journey is about fighting for survival with your calicorns, which can die, but there's a good chance you never really find that out, since it's near impossible to lose them even when trying to do it on purpose, which is where the game fails. If those things were treated like a fluffy bunny instead of an unbreakable mammoth, the game and the story it's trying to convey could have been way more interesting with a little more challenge. Which, speaking of challenge, a game that offered plenty of challenge that I couldn't get enough of was Elden Ring Nightreign, which I really wish I could have got around to reviewing it when it released. I was super excited for it after playing the network test flight despite the issues I had with it, but when it first came out, it would endlessly crash on me while I was trying to play on my Xbox Series X, and due to me both moving and my first child being born not long after its release, I moved on so I could get a video out before those two things happened, since I knew I would be gone for a while. Plus, I probably would have ripped into the game a little too harshly if I did make a video at that time. But that didn't stop me from returning to Nightreign after it got a bunch of updates, and it turned out being way better than I expected. I had like 3 crashes when returning to it for the 15 or so hours I put into it. Solo mode ended up feeling way better balanced than I expected and was a blast to play. Not to mention the content of the game has a good variety between the characters and maps. Though I'm sure if I put in a good 50 plus hours, I could see myself getting tired of it, which is why while I like seeing devs experiment with IPs, and I do believe that's important, it's just hard to beat that classic From Software experience that something like the original Elden Ring or even Dark Souls can provide. The replayability of those games is so good, I don't know if something like Nightreign will ever truly capture that feeling. Which is probably why you rarely see games that take inspiration from something like Dark Souls not try to stray too far outside of its core gameplay designs, because they are so good, and I'm glad so many don't, since Souls-like have become my comfort food of gaming, even if we get an overabundance of them. Though thanks to that overabundance, sometimes you get games that just stand out more than others, and AI Limit was one of those games for me. Easily one of my favorite games of the year, and what I loved about AI Limit was how it tweaked that Souls formula in a very simple way. It had this sync rate bar where, depending on how full it is, determined how much damage you could do. This is a cool system since it rewards you for playing smart, since not only taking damage lowers it, but using special moves as well, so increasing this gauge through things like basic attacks while avoiding damage to dish out your next special move felt almost like playing chess, which made the combat system feel more like an action RPG than a Souls-like, and that's probably why I had a hard time putting it down, even with how poor the enemy variety could be outside of boss fights. Though if there's one game I couldn't put down fast enough, that's Pokemon Legends ZA, and I really hate that I have to say that because this was my first experience playing the Switch 2. Which the Switch 2 is pretty much what I wanted from a Switch successor, more power and a bigger screen. I just hate that the game key cards came along with it as someone who loves collecting physical games. Though with that said, I really wanted to like Pokemon Legends ZA. I played so many Pokemon games over the years, but I took a pretty big break from playing the games, with the last ones I played being Sword and Shield. But when I saw they were really mixing up the gameplay, I had to jump in to see what it was like, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't complete a game. I really wanted to review this, but I just couldn't do it. I have one simple rule I follow. I don't make videos on games I don't beat, unless it's like a demo or something of that nature. But I didn't finish the game, and the main reason why is honestly almost everything. The setting is my least favorite out of any Pokemon game I've played. When I think of Pokemon, I imagine going on a journey, surfing the oceans and rivers, exploring dark tunnels, getting lost in a forest, and so on. But this game just never gave me that feeling of going on a journey. Then you pair that with things like characters having no voice acting, which is just so awkward. Like they actually animated these characters well, but when there's no words being spoken, these scenes just fail to have that punch voice acting could provide. The graphics aren't great, but I honestly could care less about that if the setting would have been more interesting. Then the combat? I don't hate the combat, I just think it's missing something. This could be something like better control over your Pokemon. Like I had this thought that how cool would it have been if you could switch control between your trainer and Pokemon. So when you're controlling your trainer, you can move around, stay safe from other Pokemon attacks and so on, like you can do. But then you could have had this focus mode where your trainer can no longer move, but you control the Pokemon yourself. So you can move around and have a dodge button to avoid attacks, along with like shorter cooldowns for your own attacks. In exchange, your trainer can go down much easier for being hit, and after focus mode wears off, let's just say it lasts 30 seconds. Your Pokemon enters a stun state for 10 seconds where all attacks on them are critical hits. Something like that could have made the combat feel so dynamic. Instead, it just kind of feels like turn-based combat with a few more bells and whistles. At the very least, it would have been nice to have better control over your Pokemon positioning in battles. Which is the opposite I would say about your control over your Hunter in Monster Hunter Wilds, a game that really gives you that power fantasy of hunting large creatures while gaining assistance from the cutest cat companions on the planet. But jokes aside, Monster Hunter Wilds is a game I can jump on at any time and have a blast with it, even after playing in roughly 300 hours, because something about grinding for armor and weapons just never gets old to me, since the thing that makes it so replayable, and even all the games in the series, is the weapon variety. Each weapon is like a game of its own to master. It can make fighting the same monsters feel completely different. Though with that said, out of all the reviews I've done since starting in 2022, I truly hate the review I did for the game. Which is saying something because there's like 5 other reviews I've done that I'm just so disappointed with myself in, but this one tops them all. Monster Hunter is such a special series to me, and I just did a poor job of getting my points across. Not to mention, just from a review standpoint, while I don't worry about trying to cover everything a game does and just focus on what I care about the most, I just simply ignored so many important aspects of the game systems in that review. like grinding for armor and decorations, or how when I said I like the story, it's not so much that the story itself is good, it's that there were elements of the story I thought were good and made me interested in it, or even how I felt about the difficulty of the game could have been explained better. But I could go on and on about this. Monster Hunter Wilds is a fantastic game that suffered from some serious issues, like performance that still linger today. But it's a game I will always recommend because there's really is nothing like it despite how flawed it can be. Just like Artis Impact, a turn-based RPG that was just oddly fun to me even though it strongly failed at the actual turn-based RPG part of its gameplay. I say this because the game was way too easy when I played it, which don't get me wrong, I don't care if a game is easy, but easy should at least make me engage with the game still. Artis Impact was so easy that it made combat feel truly meaningless. There's no point in having various RPG mechanics if there isn't a reason to even try to understand them. Luckily though, the game has gotten many updates since I reviewed it, not necessarily fixing these issues, but making them not so bad, which is why I'll still recommend the game just like in my review, because it has such a cool style, and the game is just different. Not for everyone, that's for sure, but those who will like it will probably love it. Which is something I can easily say about Dragon Quest XI. This was my very first Dragon Quest game. I know, it's crazy that it took me this long to check out the series, but this game was incredible to me, and the main reason for that is it was nice playing an RPG that didn't feel like it was trying to be fancy. It's just a straight up by-the-book turn-based RPG, which is why I called it a generic masterpiece, because that is what the game is. The story isn't crazy, the characters aren't the deepest ever, and so on, but everything the game does, it does basically perfect. I had few issues with it, like how they handled the character Veronica, and I thought the music was pretty repetitive, but overall, this is a game that I don't believe anyone should skip, because it is one of the greatest RPGs I've ever played, and it makes me super excited to dive into more Dragon Quest games in the future. Kind of like how I'm excited to dive into Echoes of the Living more in the future, a game that truly embodies the spirit of Resident Evil and its survival horror formula, which as I'm making this video, it currently sits in Steam Early Access and it definitely has its fair share of problems right now, which I'll get into here in a second, but I want to make something clear about the game. The potential of this game is insane. Usually when a game launches into early access, you can usually tell if it's going to be good or bad just by the quality of that experience, which what's here already for Echoes of the Living is so good. You have an entire story campaign with the character Liam Oakwood that could take anywhere from 10 to 15 hours on a first playthrough, which features a large variety of puzzles, weapons, and enemies that make every moment exciting. They do such a good job of introducing each of these three things at a good pace, with them getting better the further into the game you get. Though as I said, there was a few issues I had with the game. The first two are the lock picking and the hammer. Let me explain. So Liam has this default item that allows him to pick locks. Now usually when you use an item in a game like this, it just auto works. You click a button and a door is unlocked, but you have to pick the locks yourself and it's really dumb. There's no skill involved. Like imagine if Oblivion's lockpicking never resetted when you messed up, and also you never have to do anything but tap up. So it's just a glorified time waster, and the same applies to the hammer. Once you get the hammer, it's used to pull boards off of doors, which is done one nail at a time. There's nothing fun about this. It's not interesting, it's not cool, and it's garbage game design. They need to get rid of things like this, because they do nothing to make the game better. Just have these items just auto work. No one wants this as a gameplay mechanic, at least not in their present form. But besides that, I really had no issues with the game. A few glitched out enemies here and there, with the only other major issue I had is the fact that the first area of the game has some pretty poor enemy placement. One of the most important aspects of a survival horror game is enemy placement, because you get rewarded or punished for how you try to use or save resources. Now this could be unattended due to the early access, so I won't go hard on this point, but there were times where I would return to rooms that either had enemies I already killed or never had enemies till that point, and they would literally be right by the door, so I didn't even have a chance to run by them or fight back, which feels terrible in a survival horror game. Though like I said, it is early access, they have a lot of stuff to balance and work on for the full release, which I'll patiently be waiting for, because Echoes of the Living has the potential to be one of the greatest survival horror experiences once it's complete. Now, with saying that, if you're feeling like you want to experience something like that right now, then look no further than Tormented Souls 2. This game absolutely blew me away as a survival horror experience, and I didn't expect that because I played the first Tormented Souls for the first time this year as well, and it wasn't my favorite. Not bad, just not great, mainly due to how boring the environment became after a while. But Tormented Souls 2 just felt better in basically every conceivable way, which the biggest thing that drew me into playing these games in the first place is the fact that your main weapon is a nail gun. This spoke to me on a spiritual level as a construction worker, but on a more serious note, Tormented Souls 2 did so many things so well and few things wrong. While I would have liked to have seen directional aiming, the boss fights compared to so many other survival horror games are more than just run and shoot. The weapons are really fun to use, and the puzzles might be the best I've seen in any game like this. Unlike Atelier Yumia, a game that had some of the simplest puzzles I've seen in a game that were just not fun to engage with, since besides being simple, they didn't have much variety to them. Luckily, that's okay because the main driving force of the game is its crafting alchemy system. From weapons, armor, and potions, to building a comfy house. Alchemy is the driving force of everything in the game, and it's also what makes the Atelier game so interesting compared to other RPGs in general. The way they approach every mechanic from a crafting first perspective, it allows you to be so hands-on with almost every little detail of how your characters perform in battle. Now, with saying that, the main thing that drew me into Atelier Yumia was its more mature themes compared to the other games in the series, where they tend to have a much lighter approach to the storytelling. Though despite how much I liked the game, it did have quite a few problems outside of my puzzle issues that I could go on about for the next 10 minutes, like how the main villain isn't very compelling. So I'll just say this, if you love turn-based RPGs, crafting, and really fine-tuning your character's gear, I see no reason why you wouldn't enjoy Atelier Yumia. Though on the other hand, if you're looking for an RPG that's more straightforward and a damn good time, then look no further than Escape from Ever After. It releases this month and I got a chance to play the full game early, which I must say I didn't expect much, but it turned out to be a really fun game, because outside of being incredibly well polished, bosses are awesome thanks to a fun Paper Mario art style and combat system that works so well. The world is interesting to explore thanks to character abilities and puzzles. The story is different in a way that makes it not boring, like the entire concept behind it is about a corrupt corporation taking advantage of fairy tale characters as cheap office labor. That idea alone is so dumb that it works, and is why I strongly recommended the game. Now, as fun as it is to recommend new games that release, it's also fun going back and talking about an older game that I played back in the day, which is what I did with Fatal Frame this year, a game that is just such a cool experience. The idea of facing ghosts or spirits through taking pictures with a camera is perfection, because it plays on the fear of your instincts telling you to look away when you see something uncomfortable, but you have to overcome that and face them head on. There's just nothing like the Fatal Frame series out there, and that's just from a gameplay perspective. The stories behind the games with the devs is something else also. It makes for some truly interesting reading, which is what most people probably will do since Fatal Frame isn't the most readily available game to play. But on the bright side, Fatal Frame 2 has a remake on the way this year, so if there was ever a time to get into the series, I highly recommend keeping your eye on that, because the original is one of the greatest horror games of all time, and hopefully the remake captures what made it so special. Which, speaking of capturing, I did not expect Cronos The New Dawn to capture my attention the way it did. I really thought this was going to be another typical third-person horror action game that I was about to shoot my way through and forget about, but the gameplay ended up being so compelling to me because it did something I didn't think was really possible. Create a truly hybrid system that feels like the perfect mix of survival horror and action horror. One moment I felt like the Terminator as I blasted my way through hordes of enemies, and the next moment I was carefully moving around each corner as I tried to conserve my ammo. It really is a cool experience and easily the best game Bloober team has made, and it was interesting seeing them mix these two styles of gameplay together so effortlessly. Also, the story and art direction is fantastic as well. Something I could easily say about House of Necrosis, an indie game that captures the essence of my favorite style of game, horror RPG, by combining survival horror, dungeon crawling and RPG mechanics into an experience that is truly addicting. You have to make your way through floor after floor fighting monsters and bosses while managing resources that can be stored in item boxes for you to use in future runs if you die or leave back to a safe zone early. Combat plays out in a turn-based style where enemies only take actions when you take actions. Then you have various spells and stuff to help you survive, from using something like a cure spell to heal to wielding melee weapons with a variety of effects. Not much else to say, but please give this game a try. Though while you're doing that, you should really also give Kingdom of the Dump a try. This is another turn-based RPG that captures the humor and style of a game like Super Mario RPG and old school Final Fantasy games, but it is so much more than a callback to those games. The creativity on display here in terms of the world and characters is something I wish we could see more of. Too many RPGs lean into traditional fantasy elements, so it's cool to see a different style of setting. I mean, a world based on a landfill is a wild idea, and how every aspect of the game from the combat to the story incorporates that is top notch. But while I do praise it for its creativity, I believe the combat will be what most people stick around for. The turn-based combat is reactive with time blocks and attacks, while also featuring a grid-based system where tiles affect everything from attack power to status effects. Basically, I had a blast with the game and easily recommend it. Unlike The Mute House, a game I wish I could easily recommend, but the game is really only for the most hardcore survival horror fans. There is zero hand-holding in this game. You are on your own as you make your way through the game with no map, but on the bright side, the puzzles, combat, and fixed camera angles are all fantastic with some truly intense moments in the game. So if you're a fan of these kind of games and have been looking for something with a little more challenge, then The Mute House is for you, and I had a really good time with the game. But not as good of a time as I had with Silly Polly Beast. This was a game I went into with zero expectations and walked away pleasantly surprised. The art direction is incredible, using various camera angles to not only frame different areas perfectly for its fantastic story, but the combat as well, which sees you swinging a skateboard and shooting guns in some very intense situations, which while the enemy variety isn't the best, the combat is broken up with some light puzzle solving and stupidly fun, fast-paced skateboarding levels to keep the game from ever feeling repetitive. Which is why I have no problem saying this is probably one of the most underrated games to come out this year. Just like how the Throes of the Watchmaker DLC for Sea of Stars was extremely underrated, this was a completely free update that added in roughly 8 hours of new content to the game, which sees you enter this clockwork world to battle evil versions of the main characters as they face the darkest part of themselves with a level of character development we never got for them in the main story, which the best part about this experience outside that was it seamlessly created an experience that avoided one of the hardest aspects of adding content to an RPG, being overpowered. The DLC created its own leveling system, added new playstyles to the main characters, along with a new party member to create a truly unique experience within the game. So if you haven't played Sea of Stars yet, there is no better time than now. Something I hope I can say about Ground Zero when it releases. I tried out the demo and I have to say it's a very interesting survival horror experience. Outside of its unique location of South Korea and its visually striking art style, not saying it's good or bad, it's just different, but I wasn't sure if I liked the overall experience, no thanks to how off the movement felt to me. But I will say I did love the knife combat. The way you can dodge on the fly made engaging with the enemies really fun at melee range. I've never felt something like this in a fixed camera survival horror game, and maybe that's a poor way to put it, because being able to do this made it feel way more like action horror than anything else. Outside of that, it has your usual stuff you can expect from this genre, and I'm interested to see how the full game turns out. Now, if there's one more game I could talk about that I played in 2025, it's the Pragmata demo, the new third-person hacking hybrid game being created by Capcom. This is a game that I've been super curious about for a long time now, since it feels like one of those games that could either be Game of the Year material or just another game lost to the void once it releases. But after playing the demo, I truly believe the game could be something special. I really thought the hacking was going to feel gimmicky, but the gameplay is so smooth. Switching between shooting and hacking on the fly is truly seamless, which I thought it would feel very messy. But it just works, and one of the reasons for that is probably because of how good the movement feels. Moving while also doing all these other actions doesn't feel awkward. Some games can feel good to aim in, but terrible to move, and vice versa. But Pragmata mechanically just gets everything right. Now obviously, I can't judge the game till the full release, but just from this small little slice of gameplay, I am very excited to dive into the full game when it releases. But now the most important question must be answered. What is my game of the year? I want you to know this decision was actually not easy for me. After playing Expedition 33, I was pretty much locked into that being my game of the year, but after revisiting the games I played, Ender Lilies was right there for me. Yeah, that probably sounds dumb, but just how raw and imperfect that game felt really captivated me, making it an experience I truly loved. But Expedition 33 is just simply one of the best games I've ever played. Every aspect of the game is incredible, and the few downsides it has are very minute in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I loved the game so much I named my daughter after one of the characters. It easily sits in my top 10 games of all time. Though with all that said, 2026 is loaded with games I can't wait to dive into, and compared to 2025, where I didn't play as many of the big releases as I did in 2024, I'm really excited for this year as a fan of video games because I had to deal with so many things in 2025. It was a wildly strange year for me, but I finally feel like I can just go back to really putting the proper focus back into making content now, and maybe I can finally release videos on time for once. Anyways, thank you everyone who stops by to check out my videos or anyone who's been supporting the channel for a long time. Really does mean the world to me.